Have you ever wondered what happens when someone disappears from history itself? When official records burn, witnesses vanish, and the only trace left behind is a blood-stained diary hidden in a basement wall? Before we begin, please comment below telling us where you're watching from. This channel needs your support to keep bringing these hidden stories to light. Subscribe now and help us uncover the secrets they tried to bury forever. On March 17, 1943, Private First Class Eleanor Hartwick of the Women's Army Corps stepped off a supply truck at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and walked directly into a nightmare that military historians would spend the next 8 decades trying to erase. The official record states she died in a training accident. The unofficial truth is far more disturbing. Fort Huachuca sat isolated in the Huachuca Mountains, less than 15 miles from the Mexican border, surrounded by desert scrubland and ancient Apache territory. The base had been reactivated in 1941 to train the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions, predominantly African-American units preparing for deployment to the European and Pacific theaters. By early 1943, the War Department had begun assigning women to the base in administrative and medical support roles. Eleanor arrived on a cold desert morning when the wind carried the smell of creosote and dust. She was 23 years old, blonde, blue-eyed, a farm girl from Iowa who had volunteered 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Her service file described her as exemplary, punctual, disciplined, skilled in nursing and clerical work. Nothing in her background suggested she would become the center of the most classified military investigation of the Second World War. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after her arrival. Captain Douglas Mercer, the base's personnel officer, noted in his daily log that Private Hartwick had failed to report for morning formation. A search of her barracks revealed an empty bunk, neatly made, her personal effects untouched except for one item. Her military identification papers were missing. "We assumed desertion initially," Mercer would later testify to the Army Inspector General. But the perimeter guards reported no breaches. No one saw her leave. She simply vanished between lights out and reveille. The official search lasted 48 hours. Dogs tracked her scent to the eastern fence line, then lost it completely near an access road that led into the mountains. Local sheriff's deputies checked bus stations, train depots, and border crossings. Nothing. Eleanor Hartwick had evaporated like morning dew in the desert sun. Then, on March 23rd, a rancher named Samuel Ortiz discovered something that transformed the investigation from a simple desertion case into something infinitely darker. Riding fence line on his property 12 miles northeast of the fort, Ortiz stumbled upon a campsite hidden in a narrow canyon. What he found there made him ride directly to the county sheriff without stopping. The campsite was sophisticated, clearly established weeks or months before Eleanor's disappearance. 4 structures constructed from desert stone and timber, arranged in a defensive perimeter, a fire pit with recent ashes, and scattered around the central dwelling, items that made the sheriff immediately contact military intelligence. Women's clothing bearing WAC insignia, personal letters addressed to various female soldiers stationed at Fort Huachuca, and, most disturbing of all, a collection of military identification photographs, including Eleanor Hartwick's. Major Robert Thorne of Army Counterintelligence Corps arrived from Fort Bliss within 24 hours. His preliminary report, declassified only in 2017, describes the scene in clinical detail. Site appears to have been occupied by multiple individuals over extended period. Forensic evidence suggests presence of at least 6 to 8 persons, both male and female. Recovered materials indicate deliberate targeting and surveillance of female military personnel. Items recovered include 12 sets of women's military uniforms, various sizes, 47 personal letters and photographs, detailed maps of Fort Huachuca with guard stations marked, and notebooks containing what appear to be schedules of personnel movements. Sure too, but the detail that made Major Thorne request immediate reinforcements and seal the entire canyon as a restricted military zone was something else entirely. Carved into the stone wall of the largest structure, in perfect English, was a message that read, "They walk among you. They wear your faces. The transformation is complete." Chiquan, the investigation that followed revealed a pattern so disturbing that it was immediately classified above top secret. Major Thorne's team discovered that Eleanor Hartwick was not the first woman to disappear from Fort Huachuca. Over the previous 8 months, 4 other female soldiers had vanished under similar circumstances. Each time the official explanation had been desertion or transfer. Each time their files had been pulled and sealed. Each time someone had ordered the investigation closed before it could begin. Sergeant Ruth Morrison, who worked in the base records office, would later provide testimony that was sealed until 2020. I remember the first girl who disappeared. Private Catherine Walsh, November 1942. The next morning, her commanding officer came to records and personally removed her entire personnel file. He told me she'd been transferred on emergency orders, but I saw his hands shaking when he carried that file out. I saw the fear in his eyes. Major Thorne's team began conducting discreet interviews with female personnel at the fort. What emerged was a consistent pattern of reported incidents that had been systematically dismissed or ignored. Multiple women reported seeing figures watching them from the desert at night. Several described finding personal items moved or missing from their barracks. One soldier, whose name remains redacted in the files, reported waking to find muddy footprints leading from the barracks door to her bunk and back out again. The most chilling testimony came from Private Linda Torres, who had been Eleanor Hartwick's bunkmate. Eleanor told me about the dreams 3 nights before she disappeared. She said she kept dreaming about a woman standing at the foot of her bed, perfectly still, just watching. The woman looked exactly like her, Eleanor said. Same hair, same face, same build. But the eyes were wrong. The eyes were completely black. When Eleanor woke up the 3rd night, she found dirt under her fingernails, even though she'd washed her hands before bed. Desert dirt. Red clay. She was scared. She asked me if I thought someone was playing a prank. I told her it was just stress. I should have believed her. On March 28th, Major Thorne's investigation took an even darker turn. A patrol searching an adjacent canyon discovered a second campsite, this one clearly abandoned in haste. What they found there would eventually lead to the formation of a special military task force and the deployment of additional intelligence assets from Washington. The abandoned site contained journals written in English, but the content was almost incomprehensible. Page after page of text that seemed to describe military procedures and social customs as if the writers were studying them like anthropologists examining an alien culture. One passage, preserved in the investigation files, read, Day 47. The subject demonstrates consistent behavioral patterns when stressed. Elevated vocal pitch, rapid eye movement, increased perspiration. These responses must be memorized and replicated exactly. Any deviation will compromise the integration. Recommend extended observation period before final transition. Another journal contained detailed physical descriptions of dozens of women, complete with notes on mannerisms, speech patterns, and daily routines. Eleanor Hartwick's name appeared on page 12, along with entries for the 4 other missing soldiers. Each entry concluded with the same phrase, Subject deemed suitable. Acquisition authorized. Major Thorne's April 2nd report to Army Intelligence was marked Eyes Only and sent directly to the Office of Strategic Services. Evidence suggests organized group systematically abducting and replacing female military personnel. Purpose unknown. Methods unknown. Current location of subjects unknown. Request immediate additional resources and authorization to expand investigation scope beyond military jurisdiction. The response came back within 48 hours, but it wasn't what Thorne expected. Instead of reinforcements, he received orders to cease all investigation activities immediately, transfer all evidence to OSS custody, and reassign his entire team to different bases across the country. The official explanation: national security priorities supersede local investigation. Matter now under federal civilian authority. But before Major Thorne was transferred, he made one final discovery that he never reported to his superiors. Working alone after midnight in the base records office, he found a filing cabinet that had been welded shut. Using a blowtorch from the motor pool, he opened it and discovered files that had been intentionally hidden. Years later, in a deathbed interview conducted by a military historian in 1998, Thorne described what he found. There were photographs, dozens of them. Women in military uniforms, but the pictures were wrong. Something about the proportions, the way they stood, the expressions on their faces. They looked human, but not quite right. Like someone had studied humans very carefully and was trying to replicate us, but couldn't quite get all the details perfect. And, behind some of the women in the photographs, if you looked very carefully, you could see others standing in the shadows, people who looked exactly like the women in front, but slightly off, like reflections in a warped mirror. The most disturbing photograph in the collection showed a group of female soldiers standing in formation at Fort Huachuca. The date stamp read February 1943, just 1 month before Eleanor Hartwick disappeared. Someone had circled 7 faces in red ink. Above each circled face, in precise handwriting, was written a single word: replaced. Eleanor Hartwick's face was not among those circled, but standing in the back row, partially hidden behind another soldier, was a woman who looked exactly like Eleanor. Same blonde hair, same facial structure, same build. Except this woman was staring directly at the camera with an expression that can only be described as predatory hunger. Major Thorne sealed the photographs and documents in a waterproof case and buried it on his family's property in Virginia before his transfer. The case was discovered by construction workers in 2016 when they were excavating for a new housing development. By then, Thorne had been dead for 18 years. The official investigation into Eleanor Hartwick's disappearance concluded in May 1943 with a finding of presumed desertion. Her family was notified that she had likely crossed into Mexico and was being sought by federal authorities. They were advised not to speak publicly about the matter for national security reasons. But the story didn't end there. In July 1943, a woman identifying herself as Eleanor Hartwick appeared at a Red Cross station in El Paso, Texas. She was wearing a tattered WAC uniform, severely malnourished, and suffering from what doctors described as acute psychological trauma. Nurse Patricia Simmons, who treated the woman, recorded in her private diary. She kept saying the same thing over and over. "They're not human. They're learning to be us. I escaped, but they'll find me. They need to complete the process." She had scars on her wrists and ankles, like she'd been restrained for a long time. But what disturbed me most were her eyes. She kept looking at people like she was studying them, memorizing every detail. When I brought her food, she didn't eat it at first. She just stared at it, then stared at me, then mimicked exactly how I had placed the tray down. Like she was learning, like she was practicing being human. Military police took the woman into custody within 6 hours. She was transferred to an undisclosed military medical facility for evaluation and debriefing. According to the official record, she was released 3 weeks later and given an honorable discharge due to medical incapacity. She returned to Iowa, where her family reported she seemed different somehow, though they couldn't articulate exactly how. Eleanor's mother wrote in a letter to a local newspaper in 1948, "My daughter came home from the war, but something terrible happened to her out there in that desert. She doesn't sleep anymore. She stands at her bedroom window all night, just watching the road. Sometimes I catch her looking at her reflection in the mirror with this strange expression, like she's surprised by what she sees. She tells me she remembers being taken, being studied, being prepared for something. But then, she says, maybe that was someone else. Maybe the real Eleanor never came home at all." In 1952, the woman living as Eleanor Hartwick moved to California and took a job at a defense contractor facility in Burbank. Her employment file shows exemplary performance reviews and steady advancement. She never married, never had close friends, and lived alone in a small apartment until her death in 1989. When her belongings were donated to charity after her death, volunteers found something disturbing among her possessions. Dozens of notebooks filled with detailed observations about human behavior, written in the same clinical style as the journals found at the campsite in Arizona. The entries spanned 46 years, from 1943 to 1989. Documenting everything from emotional responses to social customs to physiological reactions to stress. The final entry, dated 1 week before her death, read, "Year 46 of observation. Integration complete. No one suspects. The others are in position now, waiting. When the signal comes, we will reveal ourselves. Until then, we practice. We learn. We become more perfect versions of what they expect to see." The notebooks were turned over to local authorities, who forwarded them to the FBI. The file was closed with a notation that the materials were products of mental illness and required no further investigation. But researchers who have studied the case have identified something disturbing in the available evidence. Cross-referencing military records, civilian employment files, and census data from Fort Huachuca personnel between 1942 and 1945 reveals an anomaly. 23 female soldiers who served at the base during that period went on to have careers in sensitive government positions, defense contractors, or military research facilities. None of them ever married. None had children. Most lived alone and maintained minimal social connections. And according to co-workers and neighbors, all of them shared certain peculiar characteristics. They rarely slept. They observed people with unusual intensity. And several were described as seeming to study normal human behavior as if they were learning it for the first time. In 2019, a doctoral student at the University of Arizona named Michael Chen began researching the history of Fort Huachuca for his dissertation. While reviewing declassified military documents, he discovered Major Thorne's original investigation files, including references to evidence that had been transferred to OSS custody and never seen again. Chen filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the complete case files. The responses he received were heavily redacted, with entire sections blacked out for national security reasons. But in the margins of one document, someone had written a note in pencil, apparently missed by the censors. See Operation Chrysalis Files, subsection Lambda. Operation Chrysalis has no official existence in military or intelligence records, no budget line items, no personnel assignments, no after-action reports. It appears in exactly 3 declassified documents, each time as a marginal reference that seems to have escaped notice during the review process. Chen spent 2 years trying to find any information about Operation Chrysalis. He interviewed retired military personnel, searched archives at multiple institutions, and filed dozens of additional FOIA requests. Most inquiries hit dead ends, but in 2021, he received an anonymous package containing photocopies of documents that appeared to be genuine military intelligence assessments from 1943. The documents described a classified program designed to investigate reports of hostile entities that were allegedly infiltrating military installations using sophisticated impersonation techniques. The program's objective was to identify, track, and neutralize these entities before they could compromise military operations or gather intelligence about American defense capabilities. According to the documents, Operation Chrysalis identified at least 40 suspected cases of replacement or impersonation at military bases across the American Southwest between 1942 and 1945. The program was allegedly terminated in late 1945, with a classified report concluding that the phenomenon represents a security threat of unknown magnitude and origin that cannot be effectively countered with current resources. The final document in Chen's package was a memo dated December 1945, marked Top Secret, and addressed to President Harry Truman. The content was brief. The entities demonstrated ability to perfectly replicate human appearance and behavior. Conventional security measures proved ineffective at detection. Program terminated due to inability to distinguish genuine personnel from replacements. Recommendation: long-term monitoring of suspected individuals and their descendants. Defensive protocols remain classified under special access restrictions. Michael Chen presented his findings at an academic conference in 2022. His presentation was met with skepticism from most attendees, who suggested the documents were elaborate forgeries or that Chen had misinterpreted legitimate counterintelligence operations aimed at detecting German or Japanese infiltrators. But two people in the audience approached Chen after his presentation. Both were retired military intelligence officers. Both asked to meet with him privately, and both told him the same thing. Stop investigating Operation Chrysalis. Stop looking into Fort Huachuca. Stop trying to find out what happened to Eleanor Hartwick. One of them, a woman in her 80s who had worked for Defense Intelligence Agency in the 1960s, told Chen, "There are things that happened during the war that we still don't understand. Things we were told to forget about, to never speak of. I saw files once, years ago, that I wasn't supposed to see. Files about people who weren't people. About things that learned to be us so well that we can't tell the difference anymore. They're still out there. They're still learning. And if you keep digging, they'll know. They'll come for you, like they came for the others." Chen disappeared 6 weeks after that conversation. His apartment was found empty, his research materials gone, his computer hard drive professionally wiped. The university reported he had taken a leave of absence to pursue a research opportunity overseas. His family said they received a brief email explaining he was traveling and would be out of contact for several months. The email arrived from an IP address in Romania that cybersecurity experts later identified as a known location for sophisticated digital spoofing operations. His dissertation advisor, Professor Margaret Walsh, tried to continue Chen's research after his disappearance. She lasted 3 months before receiving a visit from 2 men in dark suits who identified themselves as representatives from the Department of Defense. They confiscated all of Chen's research materials from her office, made her sign a non-disclosure agreement, and informed her that continued investigation into these matters would be considered a violation of federal security laws. Professor Walsh honored the agreement for 2 years. Then, in 2024, she published an anonymous article on a website dedicated to unexplained military incidents. The article detailed everything she knew about Operation Chrysalis and Eleanor Hartwick's disappearance. She concluded with a warning. If you're reading this, you need to understand something. What happened at Fort Huachuca didn't stop in 1943. It's still happening. They're still among us, these things that learn to be human. They've had 80 years to practice, 80 years to integrate, to spread, to perfect their disguises. How many are out there now? How many people do you know who seem slightly off, who watch people too carefully, who seem to be learning social behaviors rather than expressing genuine emotions? How would you even know? The website crashed within 72 hours of the article's publication. Every cached version was removed from Internet archives. Professor Walsh died 3 months later in what was officially ruled an accidental drowning while swimming alone at night. She was 62 years old and, according to friends, was an excellent swimmer who never went to the beach after dark. But the story of Eleanor Hartwick and Fort Huachuca has refused to die completely. It surfaces periodically in different forms. A mention in a conspiracy theory podcast, a reference in a declassified document that shouldn't exist, a deathbed confession from someone who served in military intelligence during the Cold War. In 2022, a veteran named Thomas Garrett came forward with information he'd kept secret for 57 years. Garrett had served in Army intelligence during the Vietnam War, specializing in counterintelligence operations in Southeast Asia. But before Vietnam, he'd been assigned to a special unit based at Fort Carson, Colorado, whose mission was never officially acknowledged. Garrett's testimony, recorded in a series of interviews with an independent journalist, described a classified program that tracked individuals suspected of being what the military internally called replicants or chrysalis subjects. According to Garrett, the program identified these individuals through a combination of behavioral analysis, psychological testing, and what he described as biological markers that were never clearly explained to field operatives. We had a list, Garrett said in the interviews, hundreds of names, people in government, defense contractors, academic institutions. We were supposed to monitor them, document their activities, report any anomalies, but we were never told what to do if we confirmed suspicion. Just watch, document, report. I asked my commanding officer once what the end game was. He told me there was no end game. The program was designed to delay something inevitable, not stop it. Garrett claimed that 23 of the names on his list were women who had served at Fort Huachuca between 1942 and 1945. He recognized several of them from later careers in federal agencies, research laboratories, and military installations. None of them ever showed any overt signs of being anything other than dedicated professionals with unremarkable personal lives. But there were patterns, Garrett insisted. Patterns that became clear only when you looked at the complete picture. These women never formed lasting romantic relationships. They changed residences frequently. They maintained meticulous records of everything around them. And according to surveillance reports Garrett reviewed, they occasionally met with each other in seemingly random locations, brief encounters that appeared coincidental but occurred with statistical improbability. The most disturbing thing, Garrett said, was what happened when one of them died. In 1983, one of the women on the list, a researcher at Los Alamos, died in a car accident. Within 48 hours, 3 other women on the list traveled to New Mexico. They didn't go to the funeral. They went to her house. They spent 6 hours inside, then left separately. When local agents searched the house later, they found it completely empty. Everything removed. Walls scrubbed, floors cleaned. No trace that anyone had ever lived there. The woman's family said she'd always lived simply and had already arranged for her possessions to be donated. But there was no record of any donation, no estate sale, nothing. It all just vanished. Garrett's revelations prompted a small group of independent researchers to begin compiling a database of military personnel who served at Fort Huachuca during the war years, cross-referencing their subsequent careers and life trajectories. What they discovered was troubling. Of the approximately 300 women who served at Fort Huachuca between 1942 and 1945, 47 demonstrated the pattern Garrett described. No marriages, no children, frequent relocations, careers in sensitive positions, and minimal social connections. That alone might not be significant, except for one additional detail. All 47 lived significantly longer than statistical averages for their birth cohorts. The average lifespan for the 47 women was 94.3 years, nearly 13 years longer than national averages for women born in the same period. Several lived past 100. And according to medical records that researchers accessed through Freedom of Information requests, these women showed remarkably few age-related health problems. No heart disease, no cancer, no dementia. When they died, it was usually from traumatic accidents or sudden organ failure with no preceding symptoms. Dr. Helena Vasquez, a gerontologist who reviewed anonymized medical data for several of these women, noted in her analysis, "The health profiles are remarkable. These women aged, certainly, but they aged differently. Cellular degradation was significantly slower than normal. Tissue regeneration rates remained high well into advanced age. If I didn't know better, I'd say their bodies were designed to last longer than normal human physiology allows. But that's impossible, obviously, unless someone was experimenting with longevity treatments during the 1940s, which seems highly unlikely given the state of medical technology at the time." But the most disturbing discovery came in 2023, when facial recognition software was used to analyze old military photographs from Fort Huachuca. The software, designed to identify individuals across different images even when decades apart, flagged something unexpected. A woman in a military photograph from January 1943 bore a 97% facial match to a woman in a photograph taken at a Los Alamos scientific conference in 1968. Same bone structure, same facial proportions, same distinctive features. The woman in the 1943 photo would have been approximately 51 years old in 1968, but the woman in the conference photo appeared to be in her late 20s or early 30s. The researchers ran the analysis multiple times, thinking it was an error, but the results remained consistent. They expanded the analysis to include all available photographs of the 47 women on Garrett's list. The software identified 12 cases where women appeared in photographs decades apart, looking essentially unchanged or aging far more slowly than normal human physiology would allow. One woman, identified in 1943 Fort Huachuca records as Private Sarah Mitchell, appeared in photographs spanning from 1943 to 2009, a period of 66 years. In the early photos, she appeared to be in her early 20s. In the final photo, taken at a technology conference in San Francisco, she appeared to be perhaps in her early 50s. She should have been 88 years old. The researchers attempted to locate Sarah Mitchell to request an interview. They discovered she had died in 2010 in Seattle, aged 89 according to her death certificate. But when they contacted the funeral home that handled her arrangements, they were told no viewing had been held. The body had been cremated immediately, and the ashes had been collected by family members who left no contact information. The death certificate listed cause of death as natural causes. But the attending physician noted in his medical report, later obtained through a court order, that the body showed highly unusual characteristics that he recommended for further pathological examination. That examination never took place. The medical examiner's office received orders from an unnamed federal agency to release the body immediately for cremation. The examining physician who made the initial report transferred to a hospital in Alaska 1 month later and has refused all interview requests. In 2023, a data analyst named Jennifer Park was reviewing declassified CIA documents for a project on Cold War intelligence operations. Buried in a massive file dump was a single-page memorandum dated August 1967, marked secret and addressed to the Director of Central Intelligence. The memo referenced a joint military CIA operation designated Chrysalis Continuation and stated that subjects maintain deep cover positions within target sectors. Integration percentages exceed projections. Recommend continued observation without intervention. Subject longevity exceeds initial estimates by minimum 30%. Full replacement cycle may not occur within originally projected timeline. Park published the document on social media, where it was immediately seized upon by conspiracy theorists and dismissed by mainstream researchers as either a forgery or a misunderstood reference to a different program. But 2 weeks after publication, Park received a cease and desist letter from attorneys representing the federal government, demanding she remove the document and destroy all copies. Park complied, but not before hundreds of copies had been downloaded and redistributed across the Internet. The document has since been examined by forensic analysts who confirmed the paper, ink, and typewriter characteristics are consistent with CIA documents from the 1960s. The signature at the bottom matches known examples of the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence from that period. What makes the document particularly disturbing is a handwritten note in the margin, apparently added by someone who read the memo after its initial distribution. If this is accurate, we're looking at a minimum of 200 years before full integration. Question is whether that's their timeline or ours, and what happens when it's complete. In 2024, a group calling itself the Fort Huachuca Research Initiative claimed to have obtained documents proving that Operation Chrysalis was real and remains active under a different designation. They announced they would publish these documents at a press conference in Washington, D.C. The press conference never took place. The 3 core members of the group all withdrew from public life within a week, citing personal reasons. One moved to New Zealand, one entered a psychiatric facility for treatment of what family members described as paranoid delusions, and one simply disappeared. The documents they claimed to possess never surfaced publicly, but screenshots allegedly showing portions of these materials circulated briefly online before being systematically removed by content moderation algorithms. The screenshots showed what appeared to be organizational charts for a classified program, personnel rosters with redacted names, and budget allocations for something called long-term integration monitoring. One screenshot that circulated longer than the others before being removed showed a page from what appeared to be a strategic planning document. It included a projected timeline running from 1945 to 2085, with percentage markers at various points. The page was titled Estimated Completion of Phase 1 Deployment and showed percentages climbing from 3% in 1945 to an estimated 85% by 2085. At the bottom of the page was a notation: Phase 2 Deployment Authorization pending Phase 1 completion threshold of 75%. Integration cascade expected to accelerate exponentially post-threshold. Recommend maintaining current observation protocols until Phase 1 completion confirmed. Today, Fort Huachuca remains an active military installation, home to Army Intelligence and the Network Enterprise Technology Command. Public tours are available, and the base maintains a historical museum featuring exhibits about its role in various American conflicts. There is no mention of Eleanor Hartwick in any of the exhibits. There is no reference to the disappearances of 1943. The official history of the base during World War II focuses on the training of the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions and the important role women played in supporting combat operations. But occasionally, visitors to the base report strange experiences. Feelings of being watched from the surrounding mountains, glimpses of figures standing motionless in the desert at dawn or dusk, dreams of being studied, measured, replicated. Most dismiss these experiences as imagination or the power of suggestion from reading conspiracy theories online. In 2025, nearly 83 years after Eleanor Hartwick vanished into the Arizona desert, her story remains unresolved. Was she really kidnapped and replaced by something pretending to be human? Did she escape and live the rest of her life knowing what had been done to her? Or did something else entirely happen, something we still don't have the framework to understand? The woman who came home calling herself Eleanor Hartwick lived 54 years after returning from Fort Huachuca. During those decades, she maintained meticulous journals documenting her observations of human behavior. She worked in sensitive defense positions with access to classified information. She lived alone, formed no close relationships, and according to neighbors, spent most nights standing at her window, watching the street below. When she died, those journals were destroyed by federal agents who arrived at her apartment before the coroner. Her body was cremated immediately, without autopsy. Her ashes were never claimed. Every official record of her life after 1943 has been sealed or lost. It's as if someone wanted to erase all evidence that she ever existed. But she did exist. The real Eleanor Hartwick existed. A farm girl from Iowa who volunteered to serve her country and walked into something that should not exist, something that studied her, learned from her, and possibly replaced her. Whether the woman who returned was Eleanor or something that had learned to be Eleanor is a question we may never answer. What we do know is troubling enough. There are patterns in the data that suggest something unusual happened at Fort Huachuca during World War II. There are too many coincidences, too many anomalies, too many disappeared records and sealed files. There are women who lived too long, aged too slowly, behaved too strangely. There are photographs that show faces that don't age, bodies that don't decay, people who seem to be practicing at being human rather than simply being human. And there are the questions that keep researchers awake at night. If something did infiltrate the military during World War II, learning to replace us, studying us to become us, where is it now? How many are there? What was the purpose? And most disturbing of all, what happens when they decide they've learned enough and don't need to hide anymore? Thomas Garrett, the intelligence veteran who spoke publicly about the monitoring program, made one final statement before refusing all further interviews. People think of infiltration as something quick, something obvious, an invasion, a takeover. But what if it's not? What if it's a process that takes generations? What if they're just waiting, learning, becoming so perfect at being us that when they finally reveal themselves, we won't even know the difference? Or worse, what if they never reveal themselves? What if the point is for us to become irrelevant while they simply inherit everything we built? How would we even know if that was happening? These are questions without answers, mysteries without solutions, but they persist because the evidence, fragmentary and suppressed as it is, keeps surfacing. Documents that shouldn't exist, photographs that show impossible things, testimony from credible witnesses who risk everything to speak out. And always, underneath it all, the story of Eleanor Hartwick, the farm girl from Iowa who disappeared into the desert and might never have come back. The official story says she deserted, possibly died, and the woman who returned was suffering from trauma and mental illness. The unofficial story says something learned to be her, wore her face, lived her life, and died in her place. The truth, whatever it is, remains locked in sealed files and hidden in memories that no one will share. But in these times of uncertainty and fear, when the world feels increasingly strange and incomprehensible, when we're confronted with mysteries that defy explanation and powers that operate beyond our understanding, there is still one source of truth that remains constant. These stories of darkness remind us that we must turn to the light. The Bible tells us in Ephesians 6:12, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." See, whatever Eleanor Hartwick encountered in that desert, whatever forces operate in the shadows of classified programs and sealed files, we are reminded that there are powers in this world beyond human comprehension. But we are not defenseless against such darkness. 1 John 4:4 assures us, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world." When we face the unknown, when we confront mysteries that terrify us, when we wonder what evil might be lurking just beyond our perception, we have a refuge and a defender in Jesus Christ. The story of Eleanor Hartwick is a reminder that this world contains horrors we cannot explain and dangers we cannot see. But it's also a reminder that we need not face these dangers alone. God's protection is real and available to all who seek it. In times of fear and uncertainty, we must remember to pray, to trust in divine guidance, and to place our faith not in human institutions that hide truth, but in the eternal truth of the gospel. If these stories disturb you, if they make you question what you think you know about reality, let that fear drive you toward faith rather than despair. Let it remind you that we live in a world of spiritual warfare, where forces of good and evil contend for human souls. And let it strengthen your resolve to stand with God and Jesus Christ against whatever darkness exists in this world. The Eleanor Hartwick case may never be solved. The truth about Fort Huachuca may remain buried forever. But the greatest truth needs no declassification, no investigation, no proof beyond faith. That truth is simple. We are not alone in this universe, and when we align ourselves with God, no darkness can overcome us. So as you contemplate these mysteries, as you wonder what might be real and what might be fiction, remember this: the answer to every fear, every question, every uncertainty is found in faith. Turn to God, accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and know that whatever exists in the shadows, you walk in the light. That is the only certainty in an uncertain world. That is the only truth that matters when all other truths are hidden. And that is the message Eleanor Hartwick's story ultimately teaches us. In a world of deception and darkness, faith is the only real protection we have. May God protect you, may Jesus guide you, and may the Holy Spirit give you peace in these troubling times.